to communicate together. A fruitful conference. So, Emily, the floor is yours. So I'm going to speak in Spanish. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this webinar, which has been organized by the two unions of male and female superior generals, USG and UISG, namely by the commission, the joint commission of the two unions, the Safeguarding Commission. So we will start now with a short moment of prayer. And in many cases, I think Therese, may we just stop the chat? Okay. I was telling you that we will start with a moment of prayer, and I think that for many of us, when we enter the ground of safeguarding, which has to do with people, with human beings, we will talk about care, protection, an extremely delicate topic because it concerns the care of human beings. And I think that when we enter this ground, we are often faced with the impression of entering a holy ground because we are speaking about people, human beings, in many cases wounded human beings, people that hurt others, and we are also talking at the very heart of the Catholic Church and of our institutions. And so in this very moment, in our moment of prayer, we become aware of how we are really living in a holy ground and how Moses, recognizing how he was in a holy ground, we live as he did, our own protection, and enter a space in which God is really able to talk to us. And so to be able to enter in this shared moment and as a shared prayer, we will pray with a video and a song which talks about this holy ground. So with this feeling of being walking on a holy ground, we will enter this webinar. And in a moment, I will just remind you about the goal of this commission, which is very concrete and has been created for both unions since the very beginning. It is a commission of care and safeguarding. And so to recall about its history, actually, it was on the basis of the call of Pope Francis calling upon the presidents of the bishop conferences all over the world that this meeting was attended also by superior generals, male and women, men and women in 2019. And it is thanks to this meeting that the two unions created this joint commission. And in that very year, in 2019, both the Assembly of UISG and the Assembly of USG took place in May 2019, when the topic of care and safeguarding was further deepened. And during the Assembly of USG, we defined as our main topic a culture of care. And so starting from there, on October the 2nd of 2019, we called upon a group of people, superior generals, but also experts of the field, and we had a meeting during which we talked about what was the objective of such a commission, who were to be its members, what kind of relationships we were to intertwine, and based on that, we defined also our objectives. So it is very clear that this commission is aimed at supporting superiors generals and counselors, and it is not a commission that cares for specific cases or cares for formation in the provinces. This commission aims at giving advice because there are many other conferences and local and regional conferences that care for specific cases. So here we want to promote the culture of care, formation and prevention. We want to support the creation of policies for the protection of minors and vulnerable adults or adults in conditions of vulnerability, as well as codes of conduct. Our plan is that of building a platform to share resources or best practices with congregations, and eventually we would like to have networks with religious men and women, but also ecclesiastical and civil institutions. So with this idea, since 2019, we have been developing our commission, and in 3 years, this commission had a specific structure. In this moment in time, we are about to renovate its structure, and many members couldn't continue their mandate, and so the group was renovated. Nevertheless, the Commission has been promoting its services through many different webinars, through publications and articles which were published in several books, as well as seminars and workshops.
Sembra che è bloccato Emily.
Emily looks so our aim is not the formation of just superior generals, but also that of delegates for protection. And we have been carrying on having meetings with the delegates and knowing that there are many delegates all over the world. We have been renewing this call to formation to safeguarding, especially for newly elected delegates. So this is the result of the meeting we had in November 2019. Very well. So now we will start our meeting with the first presentation of our speaker, who is going to be Antonio Carron. Antonio is a Recollect Augustinian. He is Spanish, and he is now General Counselor and is also committed for his congregation and also to working in the Center of the Protection of Minors in the Gregorian University of Rome. And so, as a person in charge for the coordination of the group for safeguarding in his conference and his congregation, we invited him to share with us his experience, since he is also a delegate, as I think most of the people who have been participating in this workshop now. So thank you very much, Antonio, for accompanying us. Thank you for your availability to share with us your experience.
Gracias, Emily.
Thank you very much, Emily. We started in Spanish, and so let us continue speaking in Spanish. We had decided in our commission that
Hoy
it was
esta
important to
experiencia
make
compartida
Spanish be heard today.
es
And so
la
today, our
experiencia
experience of
de lo que hemos
sharing is
vivido
actually the experience
en
of
nuestra
what
familia
we have
religiosa, en
been
la Orden
living in our
Agustino-Carmelitas,
religious
en
family
los
of the
últimos años,
Order of
aproximadamente
the
10
Recollect
años, en
Augustinians,
una
and
familia
in the last 10
religiosa
years, more or
que
less,
trabaja
in our
como
religious
muchas de las
family who
familias
has always been
religiosas
committing
que
to
hoy estamos aquí
working in
presentes
many
en
areas
diferentes
of the world
contextos
as many
geográficos,
other religious
en
families
diferentes
do.
áreas
We work in
geográficas,
several
en
different
diferentes
geographical areas
ministerios
and
y
fields.
en
We
nuestro
work
caso,
with
pues
several
el
different
origen
ministries, and in our
de
case,
este
the
interés,
very
de este
origin
compromiso
of this
con la
interest
prevención
and
del
commitment
maltrato, con la promoción
for the prevention
del
of
buen trato, de los entornos
abuse
seguros, se inició en el contexto educativo. Para nosotros la educación es un
and the
elemento
encouragement of
importante
the
de
creation of
nuestra
safe
misión.
spaces
En
starts
nuestro
in
caso,
education. For
además,
us, it is essential in our
surgió
mission.
no porque hubiésemos tenido
This
muchas
is something that
situaciones,
we
habíamos tenido
developed
alguna, pero no
not
muchas
based on
situaciones
specific cases.
de
We had
denuncias,
indeed
así
had
que
some
sí que creo
cases,
que lo
but
iniciamos en un primer
this process
momento
didn't
como
start
algo
with
más bien
reports, but
propositivo
on
que
the
reactivo.
basis of
Progresivamente
proposals and
fuimos teniendo
suggestions. We
más
started in a
situaciones,
different way. We didn't
conocimiento
want
de
to
casos
start
y ahí
with a
sí que
retroactive
tuvimos
approach. We
que
then started
reaccionar.
knowing more
Y es
about specific
además
cases, and in
una
those
experiencia
cases,
que se inició en un
necessarily
contexto
we decided to
concreto,
take
como era
action.
el contexto
With an experience
de
that
España, y
started in
que
a
luego se
concrete
fue
action, which is the one of
difundiendo
Spain,
a otros
we
muchos
then
lugares
decided to
de la orden.
spread our
Iniciamos
initiatives in many
un
other areas
trabajo
of our
de
order. We
elaboración
started with
de mapas de
work
riesgos,
of
una primera redacción
development
de
and
protocolos de
mapping of
prevención, de
risks. We
actuación,
developed some
una
prevention
definición
policies
también de
and
términos que nos ayudará a todos
implementation
a
policies.
utilizar
We started
el mismo
defining a
lenguaje,
vocabulary which
y
was
todo
useful
esto
for
poco
everyone
a
to use the
poco
same language.
llevándolo,
And
adaptándolo,
with
traduciéndolo
time
a diferentes
passing, we
contextos
started
geográficos.
also adapting
Y
and
fue muy
translated all
importante, y
materials
creo que
in
es
the
uno de los
languages of the various
elementos
geographical
fundamentales
areas.
en
And
el
this was
inicio
very
de un
important. This was one
trabajo
of the
en
most
safeguarding,
important
que
elements of
hubiera
our
un
work.
compromiso. En este caso,
With a
un
work
compromiso
like ours in
institucional,
safeguarding,
el
it is
compromiso
important
de
to
los
have a
superiores a
grassroots
nivel general,
commitment
a nivel
from the
provincial,
superior
para que todo
generals
ello
at the
pudiera
provincial, at
ir
the
poco a
general
poco
level, so
desarrollándose.
that all
Y
of
junto a
this
este compromiso
may
fue
develop
clave también
gradually,
en el
and
inicio
together with this kind of commitment,
la formación
what
de
really
aquellas
proved essential
personas
for
que
us
iban
was
a llevar
formation.
adelante, a
Formation
liderar
of people
esta nueva misión.
who
Estos
aimed
serían
at
algunos
raise
puntos
awareness and
sobre
to
cómo
be
fue
leader of this
ese
new
inicio
mission. These
en
are some of
nuestra
the
familia.
points
Es
with
importante
which we
también
started in our
tener en
family, and
cuenta
it is
cómo
important
se fue
to
poco a poco
remember these
consolidando
points
este
and
proyecto.
also to
Fue un
remember
proyecto que
how
tuvo
we gradually
como
strengthened
impulso
this
grande
project.
un capítulo general.
This
Fue ahí
project,
donde
as a matter of
verdaderamente,
fact,
con
was
la
founded
fuerza que
on the
supone un
chapter
capítulo
decisions
general,
of a general
se
chapter in
pudo
which,
impulsar
with the
todo ello.
strength that
Estamos hablando
characterizes
del
any
año
general chapter, we
2016.
decided to
Poco
promote this
después,
process.
en el
We
año
are talking about
2018, fue
2016, and
cuando
just
en nuestro
shortly
caso
after,
se
in
creó una
2018,
primera
in our
comisión
case,
dependiente
we
de la
created a
curia
first
general, que
commission
después tuvo
depending on the
réplica
general curia,
en las
which
diferentes provincias, en las diferentes regiones geográficas. Y
after
una
some
de las
time,
primeras
was created
cosas que
also in the
hizo
several
esta comisión
provinces and local
fue
areas of our
elaborar
congregation. And one of
un
the first things
documento
we do
marco,
was
aquello que
developing a
también
document, a
solemos denominar
framework
unas líneas
actually.
guía, que se
That
titularon
framework,
de esta
which
manera:
we normally
Prevención
define
y
as a
protección de
guideline,
menores
which we
en la
entitle, as
orden,
you can read,
y que
Prevention
fue
and Protection of
posteriormente
Minors in the
adaptado
Order.
a las diferentes realidades
This is a
geográficas,
document that
realidades
was again
culturales.
adapted to the
Y
several and
todo
different
esto en
cultural
un
and
primer
geographical
momento
areas where we
se
work.
decidió
And
que se trabajara de
this
manera
was
centralizada, para que a
originally
partir de
developed
ese equipo
in a
centralizada se
centralized
pudiera
way so that
ayudar
based on
a la
this central
concreción, a la
team, we could then
contextualización
give
en los
advice
diferentes
and assistance
contextos.
to the various
Poco
processes
después
of
se realizó
contextualization and
un
implementation in the
estudio
various
de los
geographical
casos
areas.
que habían
Then we
llegado
carried
a
out
la
a
orden
study
por
of
diferentes
the
vías y
several
donde
cases that
se
were reported to the
identificaron
order
perfiles de
through
personas,
several
tanto
different
perfiles de
processes, and we
víctimas como
identified some
perfiles de victimarios,
personal profiles
circunstancias,
for
contextos
victims, but
geográficos,
also perpetrators,
procedimientos. Y en este
circumstances,
documento
geographical
lo
areas,
que se
procedures, and
integró
so on and
fue
so forth.
pues
And
cuál
in
iba a
this
ser
document,
la manera
we
que iba a tener
integrated
esta comisión
also
de funcionar,
the
unos estatutos,
methodology
un
used by
reglamento.
this
Se
commission,
integró
the
también
statutes and the rule of
unas
the
pautas
commission.
claras sobre pues, cuál
We
iba a ser el
also included
procedimiento
some
canónico,
models, some
adaptándolo a
clear
lo que
models
la
as
Iglesia
for
nos iba
the
poco a
canon
poco mostrando.
policy,
Y
adapting
luego lo que
everything
se
to the
hizo
requests
fue
of the church
ofrecer
itself.
orientaciones para los
Then we
diferentes
also
contextos
offered
en los
some
cuales nosotros trabajamos.
orientations for the
Educación,
various contexts in
parroquias,
which we work.
proyectos
For example,
sociales y
education,
contexto formativo, qué
parishes,
orientaciones
social
también
projects,
queríamos ofrecerles a los
formation.
formadores,
What kind of
unas
orientations and
orientaciones
guidelines
para el
did we want
acompañamiento
to offer
vocacional
formators?
y finalmente
Were
un
these
apartado
guidelines
fundamental
for the
que es
vocational
el de la
accompaniment? Most
comunicación.
surely, but also
Cómo
another very
abordar
important
una
section which
situación
relates to
de
communication.
crisis desde el ámbito
Answer the
de
question,
la
how can
comunicación,
we
cómo
manage
manejarlo.
a
Estos
crisis
fueron los
situation
puntos
based
que
on
nos ayudaron también a
communication? How can
consolidar
we manage
este
all of
proyecto
these issues?
en la
These
orden.
points helped
Y
us
en
to
todo ello fue muy
strengthen and
importante también
consolidate this
el equipo.
project.
El equipo
And
de la comisión,
another
ese
very
equipo
important
que
element
nosotros
was the
hemos
team
denominado
of the
Comisión de
commission itself,
Protección de
a
Menores
team
y
that
Adultos
we
Vulnerables, que se
defined as
caracteriza
Commission
por
for the Protection of
la
Minors and Vulnerable Adults,
interdisciplinariedad, personas
characterized
de
by the
diferentes especialidades que
interdisciplinarity,
cuando surge una situación,
personal,
pues
and
dan las
specific,
pautas desde
based
diferentes
on the
puntos de
various
vista. Fue
expertises,
importante que esta comisión
because
tuviera
as you
una
know, when a
diversidad
specific case
cultural.
arises, there are
Recuerdo
protocols
que
and policies
estamos
to follow,
hablando
and it
de
was
una
important for this
comisión
commission to have
que está
cultural
centralizada
diversity in
y
it.
trabaja para
It is a
toda la orden
centralized
y
commission
luego en los
which works
diferentes
for the
contextos de
whole
la orden
order.
existen
And
equipos
then,
que
in the
ayudan
several
a
contexts of the order
descender las
itself, there are
orientaciones
several
de
teams
esta
which
comisión.
help
De ahí
to
esa importancia de
understand
los
the
enlaces,
guidelines of the
enlaces
commission itself.
regionales,
And this is the
enlaces
reason why it is
provinciales.
important to
Y
have
nuevamente,
regional and
para que este
provincial
equipo fuera
bonds
efectivo,
as well as
ha sido
resources.
muy importante
So,
el
for
compromiso
the
de las
effectiveness of this team,
autoridades
it is
de
important
la
to
orden.
work with a concrete
¿Quiénes
commitment
forman parte de
from
esta
the
comisión?
authorities of
Pues
this
lo
order.
tenemos
Those who are
publicado
part of this
en la página
commission
web, no es ningún
are
secreto. Pues en esta
actually
comisión hay
public names.
personal
As you can see
variadas.
from our
Estoy yo,
websites, they
en
are
este
not
caso,
secret. There are
como
many
miembro del
people
Consejo General.
participating. There is me.
Hay
I work
pues
as a
algunos
member of the General
religiosos de
Council.
la orden,
There are
algunos de
some
ellos son
religious men of our
canonistas.
order. Some of
Tenemos
them
presencia,
are
por
canon
ejemplo,
lawyers.
de
We
un
have, for
antiguo,
example,
un ex prior general que también nos ha ayudado
a
mucho
former
a,
general
de alguna
uh,
manera,
abbot
poner un
who
poco de
helped
luz
us
a
a
algunas
lot
situaciones. Tenemos algunos
to
formadores también de diferentes
give light
contextos
to some
y
specific situations.
consideramos
We
que
have
era muy
formators
importante
from
también
various
tener
backgrounds, and for
dentro de
us
la
it was
comisión
very, very
personas
important
que no fueran
in this
religiosos,
commission to
que
have
fueran personas
people who were
de
not
fuera de
religious
la orden
people.
que nos pudieran dar
We wanted to include people
una
from
perspectiva diversa,
outside
un feedback
could
diverso
who
que
could
nos
give us
ayude.
a
De ahí
different
la
perspective
presencia,
and
pues en este
feedback
caso,
which
por
may be
ejemplo,
useful
Carmen
for
Montejo es
us.
una médico que también pues colabora
For
con
example,
nosotros.
Carmen
También
Montejo,
seguro que
who
muchos
is a
conocerán
doctor
a Daniel
collaborating with
Portillo,
us, he
que desde el
works so
contexto de
much for
Latinoamérica,
this
pues
reason,
también
or Daniel
está haciendo una
Portillo,
labor muy
who
buena
comes
y que en
from
esta
Latin
comisión
America
pues
and has
también
been working a
ha
lot from this
contribuido mucho.
perspective.
Esto en
And in this
cuanto al
commission, we
equipo,
try
el
to
equipo
work a
de la
lot
comisión.
in this
¿Cómo hemos
sense.
organizado
And this
en
for just
estos
the team of
años
the
el
commission.
trabajo
just considering the structure of the work that we have been doing in our order. And as for the structural elements
Esta
of
es
this
la
scheme,
imagen que nos puede
which
ayudar
becomes
a
concrete
verlo,
at the
porque
macroscopic level.
tenemos,
This is a
en primer
picture
lugar,
which may
en
help
color
us to
rojo,
understand the whole situation
pues esa
because we have
estructura
a
de la
basic
Comisión
red
General,
structure
que depende del
representing
Prior
the General
General, que
Commission,
trabaja
which
para toda la
depends
orden
on the
y que luego
General
tiene
Prior, who
una
works for
relación
the whole
muy estrecha
order,
con las
and then
comisiones
is
provinciales, que tienen
closely
competencias
working with
diversas,
the provincial
porque quien
commissions,
de
whose
alguna manera
skills are different,
coordina, gestiona,
because in a way
atiende
or another,
las situaciones que
these
se producen
commissions
es la
manage
Comisión General y todo
and
ese equipo
are in
que luego
charge of
le da
some
orientaciones a las
situations
comisiones
together
provinciales
with the General
para que
Commission, which
sobre todo
gives
trabajen en el
guidelines
seguimiento
to
y
the
aplicación
provincial commissions for
de
them
las
to work
orientaciones de la
on the
Comisión
monitoring
General,
and
se
implementation
fundamentan mucho
of
en la
the
formación y la
orientations coming from
sensibilización
the General
y
Commission.
son una pieza clave,
Formation and
sobre todo para
sensibilization
acompañar
are
a las
crucial.
personas, en
And
este
this is
caso a las
also very
víctimas o
important
a los
for the
victimarios.
accompaniment of
Y
people,
lo que
in this
esas
case,
comisiones
victims or
provinciales realizan
perpetrators.
es
This
la labor
provincial
de
commission
contextualizar y de
actually work
concretizar
to
todas esas
contextualize
orientaciones en todos
and
los ámbitos
to
pastorales y
concretize
comunitarios a los que
those
se refiere
orientations
el
and
color azul que
guidelines
está abajo.
that
Educación,
we
parroquias, ámbitos
developed in the
sociales,
blue
formación
areas,
y
which you can see at the
acompañamiento
bottom.
vocacional.
So in
De forma
parishes,
más
educational
concreta,
centers,
¿qué es lo
social
que
projects,
hace
and
la
so on and so
comisión?
forth. So
Pues
concretely speaking,
atiende,
what does the
sigue
commission do?
los casos,
Well, most
hacen
surely
una
it
actualización
works for
también
the
periódica
cases.
de los
It
casos a
does the
partir de
follow-up
un primer
and
informe
updates
que se
periodically the
desarrolló en
information
el
based on
año
a first
2020.
report which was
Esta
developed in
comisión también pues
2020.
desarrolla
This
una labor
commission
importante en el
also
asesoramiento
develops
a los superiores
a very
mayores, a las
important
provincias,
work
a las comunidades,
as for
en obras
the advice
apostólicas
to
concretas
major
que
provincial
requieran
superiors
de
or
alguna
for
consulta.
apostolic
Es muy
works
importante la comunicación de
which
la comisión
need
con las provincias
advice.
para el acompañamiento
Communication is
de las
also very
personas y la
important
actualización
with the
de la
provinces for the
información
accompaniment of
de los
people and
casos,
for the
y una
updating of
labor muy destacada
information
de esta
concerning
comisión
specific
es la
cases. And
formación.
another important
Hasta
sector
octubre
for
de
this
este año,
commission is
en torno
formation.
a
Up until October
2.500
of this year,
personas, bien sea
approximately
presencialmente o bien sea online, han
2,500
recibido
people,
formación
both
por parte
online and in
de la
presence,
comisión a lo largo
enjoyed
de varios
formation
programas que
from
voy a
this
mencionar
commission
ahora.
with several
Es
programs
también labor de
for
la
a
comisión la
total
elaboración de
number of people
materiales
of
de sensibilización
2,500
y de
people up to
formación,
October
también la
2024. The Commission
actualización
also
de
develops
las
materials for awareness
orientaciones
raising
para cada
information
uno de
and to
los
update the
ámbitos
apostolic
apostólicos en los que
orientations
estamos,
for every
y también esta
field
comisión
in
tiene
which we
una
work.
labor
And this
muy bonita
commission
que es la
actually
de la
carries
colaboración con
out
otras
another very important
instituciones
work, which
que
relates to
también
the
pues trabajan
collaboration with
en
other
lo mismo
institutions,
que estamos trabajando
which work
nosotros.
in the same field
Y, por
in which we
supuesto,
work.
esta comisión está también disponible
Furthermore,
para la
this commission
atención
is
a
also available
consultas
for
particulares que puedan llegar desde
specific
los diferentes
meetings and
contextos donde
advice
estamos presentes.
for
Como ejemplo,
several
aquí
contexts
están
in which we
algunos de
work.
los
For
cursos
example,
online que hemos desarrollado
here
en
you
los
can find
últimos
some of the
años.
online
Este es
courses
un
we
curso de
offered
introducción
over
a
the last few
entornos
years. This is a
seguros.
course
Es un
for
curso
the
sencillo que
introduction
se
to
hace
safe
pocas horas y
spaces. It's a
que
very
nosotros
easy
pedimos que haga
course, which
toda
you may
persona
complete in a
que
few
se
hours of
incorpora
time.
a una obra
This is
apostólica
actually a
de la orden.
mandatory course
Y
for all the
también lo
people
hacen
who
todos
enter in
aquellos
our apostolic
religiosos que
work
están
of
en
the Order
formación
of
inicial.
Augustinians. And it is a course
Es
we
un
also
curso
promote
online que
for all
finaliza
religious
con
in initial
encuentros
formation. It is an
online
online
también
based
para
course which
resolver
ends
dudas,
with
para
some
compartir
online
la
meetings
experiencia,
to
y de
solve
esos
doubts, to
encuentros
share
online surgió la
experiences.
necesidad
And
de
over these
profundizar.
online
Y de
meetings,
ahí un
we
segundo curso
identified the
que
need
ya
of
aterrizaba en
further
temas
deepening the
mucho más
analysis of these
concretos
topics.
como
Hence,
estos
we
que
created a
aparecen
second
aquí
course based
en la
on more
pantalla,
concrete
donde
topics. As you
abordamos,
can see
por
here on the
ejemplo, pues
screen,
los abusos no
we talked
sexuales,
about
todo lo que tiene que ver
the
con
topic of
el poder,
abuse, not
el
just
abuso de
sexual abuses,
conciencia,
but
el abuso
everything
espiritual,
related
las
to
víctimas
power
adultas,
abuse,
lo que tiene que ver
spiritual
con el
abuse,
acompañamiento
adult
a las víctimas
victims,
y
but also the
supervivientes, lo que
accompaniment of
tiene que
victims
ver con
themselves
el abuso
and
en
of
entornos
survivors,
digitales. Todos
as
estos
well
temas
as the
salieron de
topic of
esos
abuse in the
encuentros
digital
online
world.
a
All these
partir de esa
topics derive
primera
from
formación.
those online
Y para
meetings that
ello
we had
contamos con
over the
muchas
first
personas
formation
que nos han
course. To
ido
do that,
ayudando
we
a
counted on the
poder
support of
desarrollar
many
estos temas.
different
Creo
people
que
who
una
helped us
pauta
to further
importante
develop
también
these
es
topics. And
que
I think
no tenemos que hacerlo
that a
todo
very
nosotros
important
ni
topic that we
inventarlo
need to
todo nosotros,
understand is
sino
that
también tenemos que
most
dejarnos
surely we
ayudar
can't
y
possibly do
colaborar,
everything
colaborar
alone. We can't
con
possibly
otras
invent
personas que
everything. We
también
need
pueden aportarnos
to
muchas cosas en todo ello.
welcome the help of
Y
others
todo esto
and
lo
welcome
hemos
their
ido
support because they
desarrollando
are
cada
experts.
vez
We
más.
also
Hay
decided
un
to develop
plan muy bonito
further
que está
develop these
desarrollándose
points.
en
Hence,
colegios.
we
Es
have
una
a
experiencia que
very
surgió
effective plan that we have
inicialmente en
been developing
España,
in
pero que
schools,
ahora ya se ha llevado a
which was
contextos
developed in
de
Spain and
Latinoamérica, a
that
contextos
we now
de
spread also
Centroamérica,
to Latin
a
America
contextos también
and in
de
Central
África, ¿no?
America,
Que de alguna manera
as well
nos
as in
está ayudando
Africa.
mucho a poder pues
We are talking
implementar
about
todas estas
initiatives that
medidas
have been
que
helping
hemos
us a
previsto.
lot to
Y ya
translate in
por
practice
concluir,
all these
qué
measures
nos
that
queda
we developed.
por hacer?
And then to
Pues en
conclude,
primer lugar,
what is
seguir
left to
ampliando
do? So, first
lo
and
que
foremost, it is
supone el
important to
radio de acción
continue
de todas las
expanding
formaciones
our
y todas las etapas de
action,
formación de los religiosos,
our
formación inicial y formación
and our
permanente.
action and
Creo
formation,
que es
reaching all the
importante
steps of
también integrar
ongoing
en los
formation. And
programas de
I think it
formación de
is
los
very,
laicos
very important
temáticas
to
sobre prevención
include in
de
our
abusos.
formation programs
Es
for
importante, y lo estamos viendo cada vez más, pues integrar la atención a otros tipos de vulnerabilidades, abusos adultos, abusos no sexuales, en contextos pastorales, en contextos comunitarios. Está siendo muy bonita en nuestro caso la experiencia con nuestras hermanas
and
de
in
vida
our case,
monástica, de vida contemplativa, que también
and with
están
the
recibiendo
experience we
pues
had
esta
with
formación y que nos ayudan a
contemplative
entender
sisters,
cuáles
these
son las
sisters have been
casuísticas y cuáles
receiving
son las
formation that
necesidades
help
que
them
para
to
poder
understand
promover una
what
cultura
are
del
the
buen trato
cases and the
ellas
needs
necesitan.
to promote
Promover también
uh,
medidas de acompañamiento,
care
de
of
reparación a las
safeguarding
personas en
culture.
los
We also want to
diferentes
promote
contextos. En algunos
accompaniment
países,
measures
pues
and
institucionalmente,
reparation
la
measures
Iglesia
in
ya está
some
dando pasos,
countries
pero en
at the institutional
muchas
level. In
realidades
some
no
cases, the
existen
church has already
esos
been taking
mecanismos
steps,
y
but in
tenemos que
other
ser poco a
realities,
poco
these
nosotros los que
mechanisms do not
vayamos
exist.
viendo
And
qué
this is the reason why
orientaciones
we must
se
be the
pueden
ones who
ofrecer.
gradually
También
understand
es importante la actualización,
the measures
la
to be
creación de
promoted,
nuevos
and to this end, it
materiales,
is also important
atendiendo
to be constantly
a
updated
nuevas
and to
necesidades
create
y
new
sobre todo la
materials,
importancia
trying
de
to welcome
seguir
the new needs
formando
of
a
people. And
personas
it is also important to understand
que puedan
and to
liderar
remember that
este
we need to
compromiso y
continue
que podamos seguir
training
caminando
people,
hacia
the
una
new leaders of the
sostenibilidad
future
en
for
el
this
tiempo
commitment. And
de
it is
este
also important to
compromiso
continue walking
que
towards
queremos tener.
sustainability.
Y
Long-term
también, por
sustainability is a
destacar,
very
por
important
último,
commitment for us.
mi experiencia
And
a lo
it is
largo
also very
de todos
important for us
los
to
años
remember
que
about
llevo
our own
acompañando
experience
pues
over the years.
esta
Over these
misión,
years,
que
in
creo que la
fact,
considero una
have
misión.
been accompanying
Yo
this
comencé en
mission.
esto
I
pues
really
cuando
think
era
and I consider
director
it as
de
a
un
mission.
colegio
I
antes de
started
trasladarme
with this
a
approach when
Roma
I
y
was
aquí
a
sí
school
que tuve la
director before
posibilidad
moving to
de
Rome.
ampliar
And
mucho
here I
la
had the
perspectiva
opportunity of
y de
expanding
poder
my
también
perspectives and points of
comunicarme y
view.
llegar a
And I
muchas más
understood
personas.
how
Entonces,
it
Es muy
was
importante
possible to
ese
reach out
apoyo,
to
ese
many more
apoyo
people than
desde el
in the past.
liderazgo
And having
institucional
this kind of
para que todo
support is
esto
crucial
pueda desarrollarse.
from the institutional
En mi
leadership.
caso
We need to
personal, la formación
continue promoting
ha
these
sido muy
initiatives.
importante
In
y
my
sigo
case,
apostando
formation
por
was
ello, una
crucial,
formación
and
permanente
I also
que me
continue
ayude
working for
a
my personal
seguir
formation, for my ongoing
profundizando y
formation,
abriendo
which helps
mucho
me to
la
continue
mirada
deepening the
a nuevas
analysis of these
perspectivas,
topics
a
and to
nuevos
have
retos,
an
a
open
nuevas
mind, open
realidades que
horizons to
sigo
new
desconociendo.
challenges and
Ha habido
realities,
muchas etapas
which I still don't know.
en mi
There
experiencia en
have
estos
been
años y
different
en la
stages in
experiencia
my experience
institucional de
over
la
these
orden.
years
Momentos de
in my
interés y momentos de
institution.
desinterés.
I lived
Momentos
moments
de
of great
buena
interest
acogida
and
y
lack of
momentos
interest,
de rechazo.
moments in which I
Momentos
was
de
well
compromiso
welcomed
y
and moments in
momentos
which I
de
was not welcomed,
incredulidad
moments of
ante los casos que
commitment
se
and
podían
moments of
presentar.
awe
Momentos de
in
considerarlo
front of
como
the
un
cases we were
elemento
faced
clave
with,
de nuestra
moments in
misión
which
y
we
momentos de
considered
considerar
this
que
mission as
esto es
key,
una
and moments
moda
in
que
which
va a
we
pasar
thought it
y
was actually
que
just
terminará
a
el año que
fashion
viene o
of
dentro de
the
unos años.
moment,
Y esa
which over
perspectiva
time will
también
end, maybe
la he
next year,
encontrado.
over or over some
Las
years.
dificultades,
This
pues
perspective
vienen
is
sobre
nevertheless
todo de
present in
parte
our work.
de la
What
dificultad
about
de
the hard
coordinar a
moments?
todas las
They mostly
instancias de
relate
la orden,
to the
comunidades de los
coordination work
cinco
of all the
continentes, que
instances of
dificulta
the
mucho
order and of
desde
the
un punto de
communities in
vista
the five
cultural, desde un punto
continents
de vista de
where we
la
work.
sensibilidad. Es
And
importante
as far
también
as culture is concerned,
abordar esta dificultad de la
coordination makes
definición
the whole
de
work
las
very hard, and it is
competencias,
important to
preguntándonos
address
bien cuál queremos que sea
these
el campo de
issues. And
acción.
when we want
Esta es
to
una pregunta
define
que
our
nosotros seguimos
skills and the skills
haciéndonos.
of the
¿Queremos
commissions, we
centrarnos
need to ask
exclusivamente
ourselves
en los
what we
abusos de
want our
menores?
action field to
¿Queremos
be. We want to
abordar de
focus
manera
just on
seria
abuse to minors, or we want to
en
focus
personas
on
adultas en situación de vulnerabilidad?
abuse on
Queremos
vulnerable
ampliar la
adults.
perspectiva a abordar
We want instead
abusos, por
to
ejemplo, en el
expand our
ámbito laboral.
perspectives and also
Queremos
deal with
abordar
work
pues
related
conflictos
abuse, or do we
relacionales.
want to work
Llegan muchas
on
veces
relational
consultas sobre
conflicts?
estas
We
tipologías
received
y
many
necesitamos
requests
darle
concerning
una
this kind
respuesta.
of
Y para ello,
problems, and we
insisto, es
most
muy
surely need to
importante
give
el
an
trabajo en
answer to
equipo,
that.
es
And
muy
to do that,
importante
again, I want
también
to remind you, it is very important
una
to be able
buena
to work as a
pedagogía
team.
a la hora de
It's
introducir
important to
cuál
have
es el
an
compromiso,
effective
cuáles son los
pedagogy to
objetivos. Hoy día
introduce
hablar de
our
abusos
commitments,
muchas
goals.
veces supone un
Nowadays,
rechazo.
talking about
Entonces es
abuse has
importante
to do
utilizar
with
bien el lenguaje
something that
y
relates to
proponer
a
qué es lo
refusal,
que
and
se
it is
quiere
very
al
important to
fin.
use the right
El tema de los
language
abusos
and
creo que no es solo
and
el tema de los
offering
abusos,
the
sino que
final
también
objective of
tenemos
our
que
mission with
hacer una
clarity.
propuesta. Tenemos que
We
ser
will not just work on
propositivos. Todo esto
abuses,
nos tiene
but
que
we need to
llevar a
develop
mejorar algo,
proposals.
a
We must be
mejorar en
propositive.
nuestras
And this
relaciones, a
must lead
mejorar
us to
en,
improve
pues,
our
también la manera
relationships,
como
to
percibimos
improve
al otro, la manera
our
como nos cuidamos.
way of
Y todo
perceiving
esto
others,
haciendo que
the way in which
sea
we care of
sostenible, que
others.
sea
And all of
sostenible y
that
que quede impregnado
with
como
a
algo
sustainable
transversal,
based
transversal
approach. We
en
want
todo
to
lo que
have an
supone
approach
pues
which
nuestra vida y nuestra misión. Así que
is
esta es
sustainability
la
based in all
experiencia
aspects of our
que
life
podía
and mission.
compartir en este día
Now, this is most surely
y
our
espero
own
que pueda
experience,
ayudar, que
experience I
pueda
could
también
share
pues
with you,
servir
and it was a
a
pleasure for
alguien
me to do
que
that.
esté
I hope
trabajando en ello.
this could help you,
Muy
and
bien,
I
pues
hope it
gracias,
may help you in the
Antonio.
future to
Creo
work. So
que
thank you very
para
much.
quien está empezando
Thank you very much,
como
Antonio.
delegado o delegada,
I think that for
seguramente
those
ha
who have
resultado muy
been
útil
starting their work
esa
as
visión
delegates,
global, compartir
your
la experiencia
report
del
was very
camino.
important.
Y ahora vamos a
It is
tener un
important to
tiempo
share
en
our own
pequeños
path.
grupos.
And now we will have a moment in
Va a
which we
ser
will work in
un
small
tiempo
groups.
en grupos lingüísticos, van a
It
explicar
will
la
be
dinámica y va a
a
ser
moment of dialogue
durante
in
media
language
hora.
groups, and we will work
Nos
for about
proponemos
30 minutes, more or less.
que, así como aparece ahora aquí,
So these are the questions that we want you to answer. So you will have time to introduce yourself and to say how you feel. But then after that, because you will have only 30 minutes of time, we want you to answer these questions. The first is, what are the main areas of concern in these areas? As delegates, what are the main areas of concern? Saying, I'm very concerned about this. So as a group, you should elicit the three main areas of concern, the three that you find most important. The second question, what would you find most helpful from the Commission? What would be most useful for you from the Commission? Now, knowing how the structure, how the Commission works, its limitations and possibilities, what would you define as useful from the Commission? So I will now share in the chat these two questions for you to have them. And then I will also share a link which will lead you to a Google form in which you will find this picture. Just one member of the group will answer with the number of the group, not saying how many people are in a group or the group number 1 or 3 or 20. And when you will enter the meeting, the groups, you will see this group number. Then there is also space for the three main areas of concern. You may write them here. And for the following space, you will have the three things that you think may be most helpful from the Commission. So I will now put the link in the chat for you to have both questions and the link to the Google Drive.
Perfetto. Emilia, adesso
Very
diamo la
well,
parola a
Emily.
Gianluca per
Now we will
spiegare
leave
come
the
si
floor
fanno
to
i
Gianluca
gruppi.
to
Grazie.
explain how we will have the
So,
groups. Thank you.
Right now, I'm going to tell you how to do the groups. On your screen right now should appear some question. It's a questionnaire. You have the 4 language. You can choose your language. And on the base of your choice, you're going to be in groups divided by language. So the question here is asking you to choose which language you would like to participate in groups in. So right now it should appear on your screen. So I ask you to respond.
Okay, welcome back to everybody. I think that everybody is here now. So we will continue now before having a break, listening to Brother Brendan Geary. I realize that there are a good number of groups that have written their answers there. There are 10. So if some one of you need to continue writing, please continue doing now. okay, the secretaries of the groups. So I have the pleasure to introduce Brother Brendan Geary. He's a Maris brother like me. By the way, I didn't introduce myself at the beginning, so I'm a Maris brother and I am the secretary of the Union of Superior Generals. Because of that, I am here now. Brother Brendan is Scottish and is a clinical and counseling psychologist and has a long experience of dealing with all this question of safeguarding. Has co-edited 4 books, one of them, for example, The Dark Night of the Catholic Church on the clergy sexual abuse crisis, and has been working many years in presentations, seminars, workshops, and also accompanying and receiving victims and also people who have abused. Has experience of government because was provincial for a number of years, and for the last 4 years, member of this commission of safeguarding of the joint commission of the 2 unions. So was in the first commission and now starting with the second. So thank you very much, Brendan, for being with us. He will share with us about his own experience and also helping us to promote a culture of safeguarding in our institutes. Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you, Emilio, for your introduction and kind words. Can people see the screen?
Yes.
And hold on, there was something I had to click about sound.
Before
Yeah. Hold on, let me do that again. So go to Zoom.
Now start again.
Start again, Zoom. Share. Share sound, that's okay. Desktop 2. Click. Okay.
And now project.
All right, slideshow. Play from start. Okay, there we are. Thanks also to Antonio for his presentation about the work in his own religious order. It's great to see that there are, I think, 193 participants, which I think is evidence of the value of these training webinars. So I'm delighted that so many people are participating. I'd like to begin with part of what Pope Francis said in his letter to the people of God of the 18th of August 2018. No effort must be spared to create a culture able to prevent such situations from happening, but also to prevent the possibility of their being covered up and perpetuated. And in that short excerpt from his letter, Pope Francis touches some significant points. The sad story of cover-ups, what we can do to prevent it, but also it's about a culture. When this crisis began, people focused on individual members of religious orders and priests who did bad things. But over time, there was an acceptance that there was a culture in churches, religious orders, dioceses that in some way contributed, and we need to replace that with a culture which actually is about care and protection. So what does that mean? Well, there are many definitions of culture, but it's a way of being and understanding where there are shared assumptions and practices that influence and direct the behaviours, policies, and choices of an organisation. One person put it rather simply, culture is how we do things around here. And we are always very conscious of our distinct charisms and how we live in our religious orders. That's the culture, something that often appears intangible but is reflected in behaviours. When it comes to a culture of care and safeguarding, what the Pope is saying to us, and what many of us would believe, is that victims have to come first. That's very easy to say, but I have to say it has not been easy in practice for a whole range of reasons. There are some victims who don't want contact. There are some victims who very often, for good reason, will feel very angry and make demands that perhaps some people find are excessive. And there are some victims who would like to have contact, but there can be fear and resistance on the part of the order. Our culture of care and safeguarding requires transparency. And that's not always easy either, because there can be a very understandable desire to protect the organisations to which you belong or people. It requires listening and compassion, and a conversion of heart from a certain defensiveness, often a defensiveness and not trusting victims, which they find very painful, to one that says we need to be open to what has happened and to be humble in our approach. It means looking at formation, I'll say more about that later, and it means committing time and resources. One of the huge growths in this area has been the investment religious orders and dioceses have had to make to create this culture of care and protection. It seems to me that one of the key things that can happen are significant formational events where people come together and have a shared formation experience. And I want to mention the first one I was involved in my own order, to which I give credit to Brother Emili and his leadership at the time, which was a Congregational Safeguarding Conference way back in March 2012. It was 10 days in length, and I think that was important. And it called together all the provincials and members of the General Council, plus one safeguarding delegate from each province. I remember Brother Emili saying to me, but Brendan, they don't all have safeguarding delegates. And my reply was, they will when you tell them to bring one, which is what happened. Why was it important to have two? I think if one person goes back from a significant experience, they can be like a voice in the wilderness. If two people go back with a shared experience, they can support each other, which I think makes implementation of change easier. In an international order like the Marist Brothers, with brothers from all continents, there was an understandable attitude for some people that this has nothing to do with me or my province. Well, that changed when Marie Collins, whom I know personally, gave her testimony. Marie is a victim of abuse from Ireland when she was a young girl, and she speaks with great conviction and authority. That led to a conversion of heart. As it happened last week, I was in Paris doing some work for the Marist Fathers, and one of the women who translated at that meeting was the translator. And she said, Brendan, I still remember that moment. I still remember translating for Marie Collins. I've never forgotten. The other translator said the same to me last November. Having a victim who speaks can be transformative for people. It's not always possible to have a victim who can speak. So one thing that can be done is to make use of video recordings of victims who have had the courage and generosity to let their experience be known to others. So I'm going to let you hear the testimony of a woman from 20 years ago who made this recording available as part of training for Baltimore Archdiocese in America.
I met a seminarian, and he became part of our family, friends of our family. And he invited me one night to go with him to the beach, and my mother said that was fine. And we headed off in his van, and when we got to the beach, the relative that he said we would be staying with wasn't home. We drove up to the house, and there was nobody home. And he said, we'll have to go sleep on the beach. And he had a van with all the seats pulled out in the back, and so we were able to sleep in the van on the beach. And during the night, he did inappropriate things with me that I wasn't frightened about. It actually happened kind of naturally, and I liked it. But I knew it was inappropriate. And so when we got home, I immediately went to my mother, and I said, Mom, I need your help. When I was down at the beach with the deacon, this happened, and I gave her the details about what happened, and she listened very well, and she wasn't distracted. She asked me some questions, and I clarified, and when I got all finished speaking, she said to me, Leah, it's a sin to lead a man on, but it's downright evil to lead a man of the cloth on. And right away, I knew that she was right, and I was already feeling scared when I went to her, but when she said that, I was terrified, and I got up and I ran to my parish and knocked on the door, and the associate priest answered, and I hysterically told him I needed him to hear my confession right away. And he took me over to church. I told him what had happened. I got absolution. I came home, and within a very short time, the deacon came back to our home to visit, and when I greeted him at the door, he began to touch me inappropriately again, and I pushed him away and said, "We can't do this," and he essentially denied that we had done anything inappropriate. And then from that time on, he began to emotionally distance himself in a way that was very painful for me. I felt like I lost what I had thought was a friendship. I met
There are many ways of engaging with this video. You could look at the response of Leah's mother, of the assistant priest, the role of confession, and should absolution even be part of it. But one of the ways that I've made use of it is to put people at round tables and ask each table to take one role. Leah, her family, the deacon who abused, the assistant priest, the parish community. And ask people at that table to say, what do you need from the bishop or the provincial? That gets conversation going, and it shifts people from the video into a particular role, which is different from one they've probably had before. And what does that do? Well, it leads to an empathic understanding of different perspectives, of Leah, of her family, of this assistant priest who has a hysterical young woman frightened at his door, of somebody who abused, of a parish community. And once you begin to listen to the different responses, the people in the room begin to see the complexity of what happens when there's an allegation. And also that no one person can possibly do everything and be all things to all people. Therefore, there's a need to establish different roles and responsibilities. I have a friend who makes use of this video very creatively, but the key thing for me is the voice of the victim, the experience of the victim, and engaging empathically with different roles can be transformative. In May 2019, Baroness Sheila Hollins was asked to prepare a 4-day formation event for the bishops of England and Wales, and she asked me to be facilitator. She invited 6 victims, and we had at least one victim each table with a facilitator, usually a woman, and also showed the film Spotlight. Imagine the impact on all these bishops of these 6 victims who were at table with them, who ate with them, who prayed with them, who socialized with them, and shared their testimony. At the end of it, one very, very fine bishop said, "We have been ministered to." And I thought that shift in perspective from what can we do for them to they, the victims, have ministered to us, was a remarkable example of a transformation that can take place. Later in 2019, I was asked to do congregational formation on culture of abuse and what does the Pope mean by clericalism. I would be careful about the way that Pope Francis criticises clericalism. I agree with him, but I think there must be many priests who are feeling a bit battered. And I don't think it helps if priests feel that they're being criticised often by the Pope. It's not going to win you many friends. George Wilson, in his book, Clericalism, the Death of Priesthood, he distinguishes between clerics and clericalism and priests and being priestly. And he says that priesthood essentially is about spiritual leadership, and being a cleric is a professional role, like my professional role as psychologist or teacher or facilitator. And every professional group has ways of having a certain status, power, special language, of excluding people and so on. And I think we have to parse out the difference between things about clericalism that we think are difficult, but things about priesthood are of value to us. I think when we do that, we engage empathy and experience, and hopefully we can have priests who are allies and who are not feeling attacked. The last meeting I want to refer to, the Sacred Heart, who had a safeguarding conference in September 2022. Again, the presence of victims, again, round tables, presentations about offenders, victims, accompaniment, how to deal with allegations, canon and civil law. The reason I want to mention this one too is I think that the great outcome for the missions of the Sacred Heart was it became the foundation of a network of safeguarding delegates across the Institute. And I think that was a desirable outcome, for that group then knew each other and could support each other and have ongoing formation. So that's 4 different meetings that I've had experience of, all of which I think were transformative in promoting a culture with a leadership group who then could move on to implementation. The other area I want to talk about this time, which I have not done before, is about formation. Because it seems to me that if we want to create a culture of care and protection, it has to be embedded from the beginning of people's experience of membership. I found this as part of a training program on sexuality for ministers, I think for Protestant ministers in America. And it said, ignoring sexuality and sexual concerns sends a message that the subject should not be talked about. This will make it more difficult to seek consultation or help when people encounter sexual dilemmas or instances of abuse in ministry. And I think that's very true. I've recently finished a research project where I interviewed 4 Marist brothers and 4 former brothers who abused children. And one of the things they all said was that nobody talked about sexuality in formation. It was a taboo subject, so that when they were having difficulties, they didn't know how to talk about it. And some, when they tried to raise it, were not met with any kind of meaningful response. Now that means that formators have to be comfortable talking about it, and that has implications for how we train formators. So I think that we have to begin by acknowledging that not only is there child abuse committed by priests, brothers, and sadly some sisters, but the abuse also happens in male and female religious orders and seminaries. And I'm not only talking about the past, I've heard many stories from all over the world, every continent, of abuse that's happened. That means we have to devote time to training in this area with specialists if necessary. It may be necessary to invite specialists into formation to ensure this subject is addressed. And I think we need to use case studies and examples so that people become more aware. There's a very, very fine section of the French CIAS report about adult victims, and I've given the reference there. I also think we have to give clear instructions to young people about what to do if they experience abuse or if they become aware of abuse. Do not put the onus on the young person to report. As part of research that I did for this research that I've been doing, I looked up foundation documents of my own order. And St. Martin Champagne, our founder, in his rule of 1837, wrote, "It is required of whichever brother who is able to be a witness of such familiarities, be it with children or brothers, to inform the superior as soon as possible." Reporting. And he doesn't say think about it, he says it is required. And I think if we can shift the culture so that young people no longer feel not unclear about what to do, but are told if this happens, this is what you do, this will help to give them more safety and be protected. I think we need to inform people in formation that if they report a concern or allegation, they'll be listened to and that action will be taken. Please notice I did not say there that they will be believed. Why do I say that? Because there have been false allegations. I've been informed of a concern of a woman in charge of formation, I won't say where, that some young women were actually angry about things and used ways of criticizing her as a way to kind of get back. And also, until you do an investigation, you do not know what happened. So I think what's important is we say you will be listened to, respected. We cannot yet say you'll be believed. Make the lines of reporting clear. I'm going to show you another video now. And this is of a former sister who was alleges she was abused by a priest. And she's talking about what happened when she reported to the superior in her convent.
I was only working in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, cleaning. Anybody who wants to become a nun wants to serve and wants to give herself to God. And that's why it is so easy to abuse nuns, because they are so ready to listen to others who tell them how they are supposed to be. Again and again, I was reproached for not walking right, not looking right, not sitting right, not talking right, because some men in the house had a problem with me.
When you say they had a problem with you,
They felt in a way attracted to us, you know.
and this was your fault.
It was our fault.
She says it was also her fault when she reported the priest's advances to her female superior.
But she became furious. She literally jumped on her feet and was shouting at me. And she was very angry with me. And she said, "You are dangerous for him. Leave him alone." I was only...
Sadly, I have heard similar stories in other places. I was in Nairobi in April, and I was told the story of a young woman who went to join a religious order. And when she went to get her letter of recommendation from the parish priest, he had sex with her. And when she went to the postulant, it was evident she was pregnant. And when the sisters took her back to her family, the family were angry with her, angry at what she was accusing the priest of, and they abandoned her. So then she not only lost her chance to be a sister, she was criticised and rejected by her family, and the priest he got off with what had happened. So I don't think we help young women if we communicate that discussing sexual matters is taboo. And we should try not to put sisters in situations where they can be vulnerable. I know many orders no longer require a letter from a parish priest, or they send a sister with the young woman when she goes for the letter. And if someone information reports abuse, do not blame them. Take their concern seriously and protect them. So my conclusion is that I think leadership is crucial, and I think that became evident from Antonio's presentation. If leadership are clear what they are doing, they can create the structures and the organograms necessary for implementation, calling upon lay people where possible to help. You absolutely need policies and procedures, but they're not enough. You must appoint safeguarding personnel and train them. I think that training information events are key because they create a culture and they give a message that this is important, and you build a group of people with a shared foundational experience. I believe safeguarding must be part of initial formation. We must ensure sufficient time and give respect for participants, and create practical exercises that engage empathy. I get concerned when I see safeguarding events in lecture theatres. Lectures are great, but I think in safeguarding training we need to be practical, round tables, workshop events for people to engage and do exercises. And I think we have to lead to a commitment to safeguarding as a ministry in our church. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Brendan. That was very clear. We will have now 15 minutes of pause. So it's in Rome 13:50 almost. So at 4 or 5 minutes past 4, we will continue with another presentation. Thank you.
Grazie.
adesso continueremo in italiano la presentazione
We will now move
in
to
italiano.
Italian. The
E prima
presentation
di
which we are about to
presentare
listen to
Tiziana,
will be dealt
vorrei dire
with
che
in English, in Italian.
se c'è
And
qualche
before
persona che
introducing
ha
Sister Tiziana, I would like
una
to say that
domanda
if there is
per i
anyone who has
presentatori,
a
sia
question
per
for our
Padre
speakers,
Antonio,
both
Fratello
for
Brendan,
Father
Sister
Brendan
Tiziana,
and Father
può
Antonio and
mettere
Sister
nella
Tiziana,
chat.
you
Nella chat
feel free
arricchiriamo
to put it
le
in
persone
the
che
chat. We
stiamo
will
facilitando
receive
questo
it
incontro
as
e alla
facilitators
fine
of this
speriamo che ci
meeting.
sarà un
And in
momento
the
per
end, we hope we
rispondere
will have
almeno a
time
alcune
to
di queste
answer
domande.
to at
Nella
least
lingua,
some
lingua
of your
vostra,
questions.
inglese,
So
spagnolo,
write
francese,
in your own
italiano.
language,
Potete
English,
scrivere
Spanish,
delle
French,
domande
or
se volete
Italian.
o dei
Write
chiarimenti
your questions
verso
or
i
requests for
presentatori nella
clarification
chat.
for whichever
Allora,
speaker we
ho il
had
piacere di
in the
presentare
chat.
adesso Sor
So
Tiziana,
now
che
I have
è
the pleasure of
italiana,
introducing
abruzzese
Sister Tiziana
completamente,
for
della
you. She is
congregazione delle
Italian from
suore
the Abruzzi. She is part of the
francescane dei poveri,
congregation of the Franciscan
e
Sisters of the
ha
Poor.
una lunga
She
esperienza di
has a long
governo anche nella
experience
sua
of
congregazione, a
governing and
livello
leadership
locale,
in her
regionale
congregation
e
at the
poi anche
regional
come
and local
superiore
level,
generale.
and even as a
Sor
superior
Tiziana è molto
general.
conosciuta nella
Sister
vita
Tiziana
religiosa
is
specialmente
very well known
femminile
in religious
per
life,
le sue
above all
conoscenze
female
di
religious life,
diritto e
thanks
specialmente
to her
del
deep
diritto
knowledge of
canonico.
law and of
E
canon law, especially.
adesso vive nella bellissima
She now
città di
lives
Assisi
in the beautiful
come
city of
suora
Assisi
francescana
as a good
e
Franciscan sister,
fa un lavoro di
and
eh,
there
dicono che non c'è traduzione all'inglese.
she works. Can you hear me? Can you hear the English translation?
Ok.
Okay.
Mi sembra
So
che tutto a
is the
posto in
translation
italiano.
going on? Okay,
Dunque,
so
Translation's
apparently
going
it's
on.
fine.
ok,
Okay.
thank you. There was someone asking in the chat.
So okay.
E adesso dunque fa
And
questo
now
lavoro di
she works
accompagnare
in
congregazioni
Assisi
sia per
to
quanto riguarda il diritto
accompany
canonico,
congregations
sia
as far as
anche
canon
per
law,
facilitare
but
processi,
also
capitoli,
processes,
consigli, eccetera,
chapters,
e anche
councils
molto
are
specialmente
concerned.
un'applicazione particolare a tutta la situazione
And
diretta dal
she
punto di
also has a
vista
specific
specialmente canonico
focus in her
di
work,
abusi,
especially on canon law and
con diversi tipi di
abuses,
abusi, no? Spirituali, di
covering
potere,
several areas:
sessuali,
spiritual
eccetera.
abuses,
Dunque,
power abuses,
Sor
sexual
Tiziana anche
abuses, and
in
so
anni
on.
luci è membro della
Sister
commissione
Tiziana
congiunta
has been member of
UISG,
the Joint
ed è un
Commission
piacere
UISG
adesso
and
che
USG
possa
since the very
condividere
beginning,
la
and
sua
it is a
esperienza con noi.
pleasure
Benvenuta
to have her
Tiziana, grazie.
experience shared with us. Welcome, Sister Tiziana. Thank you.
Eccoci,
So
grazie
here we are.
Emily,
Thank you. Thank you,
grazie
Father
a
Emily.
tutti, anche io
Thank
esprimo
you,
la
everyone.
soddisfazione
I
proprio
would also like
di
to
questa bella
share my
partecipazione,
joy
insomma,
in this beautiful
questo webinar.
participation I see in this webinar. And
Sì, avete visto che abbiamo cercato
so,
di
as you can
variegare un
see,
po'
we
il
have
programma
tried to
offertovi
make
e
the
appunto
program and
andrò a
resources
toccare
varied, and
gli
the
aspetti
turn
che
is
riguardano
now
gli
mine
statuti
to talk about
laicali
the aspects
femminili e
concerning
ovviamente un po' più
female
dal
lay
punto di vista
institutions
canonico, quindi
from
spero
the
che la
from a canon law
pausa, buon
perspective,
caffè,
and I
insomma,
hope that
abbia
the good
corroborato un
coffee
po'
you
tutta
had and the
questa
break
maratona.
made
Ho
you
preparato un
ready for this
PowerPoint,
marathon.
così
I
riuscirò a
prepared a
presentare tutte le
PowerPoint.
slide,
I
siccome
hope
poi dopo
I will be
vedremo
able to
e
share
spero
the whole
che
slides
così
with
possa
you,
essere utile.
but even if
Beh,
I
intanto appunto
couldn't, you
prima di
will receive the
partire
whole
con
file
l'uso
anyway.
del
So before
PowerPoint,
starting sharing the PowerPoint,
vorrei appunto rispondere alla domanda
I would
perché è
like to
necessario
answer the
parlare
question,
degli
why
statuti
is it
laicali
necessary
femminili.
to talk about female lay
Si potrebbe dire un
institutions?
abuso è un abuso,
We could just say that an abuse
convinto
is
che
an
come
abuse
abbiamo
and that's
già
it.
sentito,
But as we
la
have
fattura
already
culturale
discovered, the
sicuramente
cultural
ha un impatto
factor
nella
has a
realtà
great
della
impact
tutela,
in
anche il
the
genere,
reality of
fattore
safeguarding.
femminile
And
determina
also
delle
gender,
differenze
male or female
e mi
gender,
riferisco sia
brings with it differences. And I refer to
ai
the
motivo
impact, to the emotional impact, just in developing policies with all the resistances that we also have as women, refusing to believe that some things may happen. And last but not least, to the challenge of drafting some procedures which differ from what has been defined for clerics. And so most surely we need to be very watchful on our own reality. So this said, I will now share my screen and PowerPoint. So here we are. Can you see my screen? Yeah, that's great. Okay, very well. So first of all, since we need to have a more empathetic approach, I would say that every time you are faced with the topic of abuse, even with people that you don't know, it is useful for you to start from this question. When I think about the word abuse in our context of female religious life, it is important to ask ourselves what comes to my mind, and above all, who comes to my mind? Because we are talking about people, human beings. We're not just talking about papers or forms to fill up, which refer to our proper law. Most surely, we have now been living a new kairos in the church. This is a wounded time. We have been discovering this reality both for the shock we had in listening about the first reports of abuses. This is a wonder time because we were left confused and lost. We didn't know what way to go. And I see also another one today. Many of us actually are already tired about talking about this topic because apparently, most surely, the church is not only abused, and so it would be necessary to move on. Let us be watchful because these are wounds, these are real wounds which require attention, deep listening, the taking of personal and collective responsibility as institutes. And this attention is necessary to make us sensitive, not only to be able to monitor the risks which we may run into, but also as a form of prevention, we need to be watchful and care for every fall we know about, because it is our own responsibility taking action. Now, from the Universal Church, we know that we have a commitment. I like in that this word that Pope Francis chose to push this commitment, which comes from the first letter of the Corinthians. If a member suffers, all members will suffer. I like this quotation because it puts us in the horizon of interconnectedness. We are a whole and one body, and to face this plan in the church, we need to take on this kind of approach. It is not just a question of being fair, of taking action, of eliminating this problem from our life as a church. Everything starts from interconnectedness, and this strongly points to a culture shift. So when talking with female institutes, we know that we have our own ones. And so I thought that a culture shift is necessary to put at the center the vulnerability of minors and of vulnerable people, and to fight against the trend to be self-referential. What do I mean? Every institution, be it the church, the clerics, the clergy, the institution, tends to protect itself to avoid scandals and all possible consequences. Now, at the center, there must not be our institution, but the person of the victim. A culture shift forces us to take on some values such as transparency and justice. And we are fighting now against the unfair denial of real ones that every abuse causes at every level. We cannot possibly deny these ones. A culture shift is also necessary in being honest enough to admit that abuses may happen among us. Nobody can possibly think that they are free from abuse, starting from that covering up that is natural to us, let's say, towards those brilliant and strong personalities that are part of our institution and that make it famous and renowned, and that perhaps hide something manipulatory and narcissistic traits, which could, just could, bring about the risk of abuse. A cultural shift is necessary to understand our religious communities as open systems, not living isolated in themselves. And I would say that the whole path, starting from the principle of synodality that Pope Francis has been inviting us to, is a great help. And why so? Because abuses arise in systems that isolate themselves, where authority is despotic, rigid, and in need of control. There are some risk areas in our systems due to the way in which we are organized in our life. So let us ask ourselves, who are the subjects of charism in our institute? If the answer is superiors, because they are the voice and representatives of God, this is our area of risk, because we are all members as subject of charism, because we are all people who promise to share the Sequela Christi based on the rules of our constitutions. The structure of our organization is another area of risk, and I refer to those institutions in which leaders and superiors are at the peak of the pyramid of our organization, and therefore decision-making processes come from the top, and there is no sharing with the grassroots. This means that the quality of relationships, of human relationships, is based on specific groups, on castes, on who is more skillful, who is not skillful, and so on and so forth. This is a poor quality of structure. The relationships with the outside. This is also an important measure to understand how our culture influences us, also from the messages which come from outside. communication processes are also important. How having information may influence the way in which we exercise power. And last but not least, the use of economic resources. We know that who controls money has a great power, and so this is also an area of risk. Therefore, we need to work a lot on prevention, which is developed by formation, as Father Brandon just said, ever since the first steps of formation. And then we also need to grow in knowledge and in our understanding of the contents of a culture of care. And the first knowledge we need to acquire is to be aware of the fact that there are many kinds of abuse: abuse of power, economic abuse, conscience abuse, sexual abuse. So I will try very shortly to present to you some definitions, and we will start with the abuse of power and authority, which I would personally distinguish because, clearly enough, those who have power do not necessarily have the authority to do that. So in this slide, you will find some quotations which I found concerning the way in which we exercise exousia and in which Jesus did. So living life freely, talking honestly. Jesus is free to change his schemes and plans. He admits his failures. He shares his power. He teaches the disciples to discern the way of life. He makes a step back to make the disciples grow. He doesn't look for a place for him. Instead, he promises a place for those who are faithful in him. So he is not linked to his power, and he prays for others. So this is an exercise of power which is not dominion but service. So let us ask ourselves, and this, I think, for female institutions is a very important question. Exercising power in a healthy way doesn't mean having everything and everyone under control, using force to be recognized as superiors, organizing initiatives in an efficient and brilliant way, regardless of the consequences on members. Instead, exercising power healthily means acting and carrying out something for the common good and not for my own prestige, accepting, entering difficult dialogue, answering difficult questions, going through hard moments, being solid and believing in the strength of good, and then generating life and meaning in us and in others. This is the exercise of power. What about the abuse of authority? This comes when we have a role, and based on this role, we start not respecting dignity, autonomy, independence, freedom, and responsibility of others, making the person subjected to our own way of thinking. Here we will move very rapidly, but the idea of clericalism, I think, is very mirrored in this quotation. It means believing in being a group that has all the answers and doesn't need to listen and to learn anything. This is a risk that we also have in our own institutions. Then we come to sexual abuse. And here, and afterwards you will be able to read the whole the whole presentation and deepen the analysis of these concepts concerning the sexual abuse, but I would like to focus with you on the fact that there is an abuse, and you know that canon law doesn't speak about abuse, but it speaks about crime against the Sixth Commandment. And there are some sexual abuse against minors or vulnerable people or people who do not have the use of reasons, which are just abused because these people have these characteristics. Instead, there are other elements which refer to us as adult people. So when a crime against the Sixth Commandment should happen in a public place with constraint, with violence, with threats, with the abuse of power, here comes to the spotlight the concept of sexual abuse. Again, we cannot stop on here, but there would be much to say concerning the sacrament of repentance, which strongly relates, and this is what I can see in my experience, the sacrament of confession, a place in which unfortunately abuses may arise, and there is the possibility of soliciting during confession or even of the absolution of complicit people. Here I refer to the passage of canon law. What are the ones that an abuse brings with it? They cause a damage which is long lasting and which may require also professional therapy of which we are responsible. Now, I also included spiritual abuse, which is a relational manipulation of an emotional kind done in the name of God, for which the person, the victim, loses the orientation, loses the image of God, and their faith life is disoriented, and they end up losing their world of values. What about the abuse of conscience? This goes even deeper than spiritual abuse because it is a form of violation of the other's privacy, which consists in inducing others to think and judge and taking on discernment criteria based on our own reasoning without respecting the way the others think. Now, here we must admit that in our female reality, perhaps sexual abuses do not really refer to us as perpetrators, even though we are more victims. Not always. However, we have been constantly receiving reports of spiritual abuses and power abuses and conscience abuses, and we need to be watchful on that. Naturally, you represent here your governments, your general leaderships, and so creating healthy communities means taking into consideration some principles such as collaboration, subsidiarity, having participatory praxis, respecting the limitations and prerequisites to take on the role of superiors, the distinction between internal and external forum. Let us be honest, at the level of women religious life, we have been making some mess. There are also leaders and formators who need to be aware of their own role and to also be in dialogue. And there's also need for clear, fair, and transparent actions for care. We need to train people to discernment for free and responsible choices. We're not dealing with children. We need to face sensitive and delicate topics by means of a respectful dialogue, being be watchful to not spiritualize. It is not important. It is important not to think that it is just necessary to sign the cross to defeat every abuse. And it is also important to have an open dialogue with your sisters. Here, I pointed out that reporting is a must for all the members of the institutions of consecrated life, and it is also something punishable. What about the importance of accompaniment? Accompaniment at the level of victims with welcoming, listening, offering some specific services as therapeutic, psychological, and medical treatment. This is fundamental. But at the same time, we need to accompany all the people who are involved, because if there is a sister who was alleged of any kind of abuse, most surely she also needs to be accompanied. Her reputation must be protected with the privacy which is necessary. And the abuser also needs to be brought away. They need to be punished, but also the opportunity of a second chance to be cared for, to recover, and to be reintegrated in society. Another important thing is that those who are, is refers to those who are unjustly alleged or abused, because if we discover that someone has been unjustly accused of abuse, they need to be reintegrated and cared for. What about policies? Guidelines are crucial. They need to develop just procedures that accompany develop a listening process for those who report. They need to respect equality among members, the cautionary measures and disciplinary procedures to be developed, and at the end of such procedures, having reconciliation paths and damage reparation. Many are the challenges that we have in front of us, but we have the opportunity of walking this path together. And this is the reason why we're here together. Our founders did their own part, and it is now our turn to do our part. So, my best wishes to all of you.
Grazie Tiziana per la
Thank you,
presentazione, anche
Tiziana,
questa
for
molto
this
chiara e
presentation,
pedagogica.
which
Grazie.
was very clear and exhaustive.
Ricordiamo a
So thank
tutti
you
che le
very much.
presentazioni
We would
poi
like to
saranno
remind you that the
disponibili per tutti.
presentations will be made
Così
available
poi
for everyone. So
guardare,
you
rivisitare
will be able
queste
to
presentazioni.
go through all of
Ricordo
these
che
presentations. And I would
chi
also like to
consuma le
remind you that
domande
if any one of you has questions
chiarimenti che vuole
or requests for
ai
clarification
presentatori,
from
sempre ha la
some
possibilità
or
di
one of
farlo
our speakers,
usando
you
la
have the
chat.
possibility of asking by using
Mentre
the chat,
pensate queste
where
domande,
as you
io
think
vorrei
about these questions,
semplicemente
I would like
brevemente
to
darvi il
just
feedback
give you
di
the
quello
feedback
che avete detto nei gruppi.
of what you have written in the groups.
Ecco.
So here we are.
Estoy hablando italiano, voy a hablar en español.
So I will switch to Spanish. Why not?
Entonces, aquí con la
So,
ayuda de la inteligencia
with the
artificial,
help of artificial
tenemos
intelligence,
un poco los grandes temas que
we
habéis
now have
tratado en
a
los
big
grupos.
picture of what you
Después,
expressed
la
in the
inteligencia
groups.
humana tratará de
And then
leer más
human
detenidamente todo
intelligence afterwards will
y
try
ver
to
exactamente cuáles eran
draft
las
exactly
preocupaciones
what has
y
been
también qué se pide
said
de la
concerning
comisión.
our concerns
Entonces,
and
pero
what
luego de
would
esto,
be
para
most
tener una
helpful.
idea,
So this is useful to have a grasp of what you expressed in your groups. So, as for concerns, a first concern is concerning structure and procedures. What are the structures which may be helpful? What are the procedures that are most useful to follow? Another concern refers to training and awareness. So how to help our own congregations concerning this topic and to make them aware of it. Another big topic which has emerged is the creation of safe environments. And another one is how to address the topic of abuse and accusations. It is when you receive reports of abuse, what would the ideal way of dealing with them be? And another concern refers to cultural challenges. How to deal with this topic based on the various cultural approaches. So these are the basic topics that emerge and that will be given to the Commission in a couple of days. And we will also reflect on what is requested from this Commission. So training and capacity building. This is something that many groups expressed in a way or another, continuing having these formation opportunities. Then also the topic of collaboration and collaborative work and networking emerged. This is another very important topic. Then another topic that emerged is that of awareness and sensitization. So helping these processes developing and then helping the evaluation and the process of ongoing support. So these are the main topics that emerged from the groups, and as I said, the Commission will redraft this document in a couple of days. So now I will put for everyone the link that you may copy and paste in your own PC or mobile phone to find the Google Drive with all the materials of our webinar. So for the moment being, I don't see any question in the chat, but Brendan, Tiziana, and Antonio, do you have anything else to add concerning what we have been sharing so far? Do you want to complete some information based on what you listen to with the others? Except for if you indeed have a question. Please, Tiziana.
Sì, io ne ho due qui.
Yes, I have two
Allora, una
questions.
dice,
One
vorrei
says,
capire se nelle
I
linee
would like to
guida
better
a
understand
livello
if in the
generale
guidelines at
devono
the
essere
general
inserite
level,
procedure
we should
precise in caso
include
di accusa
specific
o
procedures
riconoscimento di
concerning
abuso.
allegations or
Allora,
recognizement of abuse.
direi sì,
Now, I would
occorre
say yes,
che
it
a
is
livello generale
necessary
si
that at the
stabiliscano
general
appunto
level
innanzitutto chi
we
sono
define,
gli
first of all,
organismi
who
preposti,
are the
perché se è un istituto
organisms and the
piccolo si
body
potrebbe prevedere una
who will take care
centralizzazione
of these
all'interno
reports. If your
di una
institution is
commissione che
small, you may
procede
have a
ad
central
esempio
commission
delle,
which
delle
will receive
segnalazioni e si
possible
occupa di
reports
una
and
indagine interna.
will have an internal
E quindi come questa
investigation.
indagine interna
And so you will need to understand how this internal investigation will be carried out together with what is essential for institutes. That is, that there are some cases which must be put at the attention of the judiciary forces of the nation where the crime happens, or and in front of the ecclesiastical authority. So three are the ways. For the first two, it is important to recommend all provinces and the countries where we are that it is important to refer to the authorities and then developing criteria for internal investigation. I think this is important to be established at the level of the institution. And again, it is important to centralize the process, we will do it. And otherwise, if your congregation is big, you will have a delegate working at the local level. And I think I also answered the other question. So if in a province abuse occur, what is the role of the General Commission and of the delegate? Again, this is what a text like a protocol for guidelines should define. There might be abuses for which we may decide to ask for the general assistance. Then another question I see is how to face the problem of abuse of power. Yes, we have been experiencing hard moments because at some level, at least where I am, we have been receiving reports of abuse of authority, which actually are not really abuses of authority because they do not refer to any text of the constitutions or appeal to the fact that a request of moving was made from a community to another, and this request was not accepted. But you know, this is not an abuse, because here comes the value of the vow of obedience, for which other needs are important. I have another question, but I would like to leave the floor to Father Antonio, who I saw with the hand raised. I wouldn't like to take all the time. Yeah, I actually received a question which reads, are there roles and functions that are specific, and we are moving towards the same direction, in the commission at the general level? So they were asking me about the experience that we have with these people that we were talking about. And yes, there are several functions, several roles, and above all, particularly important are those who may work specifically to give attention to the people. That is, their role is more psychological and therapeutic. There are other people who instead have a role which is more specific on structure and administration. They are in charge of developing formation programs and following up students. And it is also important to have some people who may manage effectively the networks and the relationships at the canon and civil level. And apart from that, I think it has becoming increasingly important that these people working in such commissions have also their own care. I believe that the concept of care and of carers is something that we need to further deepen in its analysis. And this is something deeply necessary. But generally speaking, I would like to answer that yes, it is important that people have their own function and role, and that all of this has also a specific accompaniment and support at the level of leadership and institutions.
Brendan, you have a question? Okay, Brendan?
Yes? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. There is a
Okay.
question for you in the chat.
Yeah, the one from you I'm reading is how to make our formation presentations more empathic and participative.
Yeah,
Is
just
that the
I
one?
received that for you from one of the members.
Right, there's another one to me directly, which I'll maybe deal with. Thank you. I think that's a great question, and it's one I'm very concerned about. I do a lot of presentations, and I love it. I love being a teacher, basically, and facilitator. The first thing for me is the room where you'll have the meeting. If you have the meeting in a stadium style room, it's going to be very hard to have an engaging participative meeting. So it's really important to have a big space where especially you can have round tables and people can work at tables like what we've seen at the Synod. We now have a wonderful model from the Synod to engage with. The second is if you have people who can prepare participative learning situations, then make use of them. If not, engage a facilitator who knows how to do this and get some help. For me, when I've been doing these things, because I can talk for ages, but I have a little thing in my head that says, Brendan, you're talking too much, it's time to stop. And at that point, it's important people begin to engage and don't have to keep listening. Because Brother Emilio will remember our former General, Brother Basilio, who said to me at one point, Brendan, if you're lucky, people remember 5% of what you say. So I think we delude ourselves if we think that by keeping talking, people are learning. People learn by doing. One of the things I've done, for example, is to get people a case and say, here's a form for an allegation, have a go at filling it in. And suddenly they have the experience of saying, oh, here's an allegation, how do I fill in a form? So they learn in the experience. Give people case studies, get them a chance to look at perspectives, and do it in such a way that you encourage learning and don't people feel embarrassed if they don't know all the answers. None of us do. We keep learning. So I think the physical space you use is important. If you don't have skilled people to create learning situations, engage a facilitator. Make sure that you find a way to say, how does someone learn how to do this and not simply have to listen all the time? So those would be my key points I'd want to pass on to you. Thank you.
You have a second one?
Yeah, it's about how to differentiate cómo poder diferenciar el abuso de autoridad con la obediencia, esto para los laicos que no alcanzamos a entenderlo. So, abuse of authority and obedience. I need to give some thought to that distinction, which I heard Tiziana talking about. The key thing for me is that abuse of power is everywhere. And I think in our church, in our traditional religious orders, we have evolved structures to protect as best possible. Why do I say that? Sadly, what we've learned about many of the new movements is that they don't seem to have had the kind of protections that we have evolved over the centuries. And even with those protections, we often get it wrong. So I think that we have to look carefully at obedience and this sense that the obedience to your superior is following the will of Christ. I'm at the stage I think that's heretical. I think that obedience has its place in religious life, but we need to be careful about equating that with the obedience of Christ to the Father, as if this somehow sanctions anything that a leader does. When I worked in a psychiatric hospital, I would often have to ask people quite personally intrusive questions because I only saw them for a short time. And I said to them, you don't have to answer the question, but afterwards I'll tell you why I asked. And I think those with power need to evolve and develop cultures of accountability when they ask people to do things. They have a right to do so, it's how the system works. But there has to be more accountability and not assuming that people will just do things. There also have to be safeguards. For example, visitation is a great principle in religious life. Maybe it's time we had lay visitors, qualified lay people who are not part of the system, who can come in and actually give people a chance to talk. So I think there's some interesting things about the management of this issue. Differentiating, I need to give more thought to. I've not got there yet. Thank you.
Tiana?
Sì, ne ho un'altra. Dice
Yes,
così,
I have another question, and it
prima
reads,
che si possa ravvisare
before
un'ipotesi di abuso
being
spirituale di
able
potere
to
dell'autorità, può
report
succedere che
an
ci
abuse
sia,
of power or
dove ci
sexual
sia
abuse or abuse
precedente
of authority,
un
it may
atteggiamento, un
happen that
comportamento, delle
there may
relazioni
be
che
a
sono
behavior
tossiche,
or attitude which is toxic
senza appunto arrivare al livello
without
dell'abuso.
reaching
Questo
the
è
threshold
offerto
of
come
abuse.
distinzione anche
And
dalla
this was
Bibbia di
considered
Isaiah.
as a distinction
Quindi
also by
come si
several
può fare
documents,
per
official documents. So how
identificare questo
could
tipo
we
di
identify this kind of
comportamenti tossici,
behaviors that are toxic
unhealthy, nelle
and
nostre comunità e
unhealthy
quindi
talk and
prevenire
unhealthy
l'abuso?
behaviors in
Allora,
order to prevent
voi che siete
abuses?
i
So,
delegati dei
since you
vostri
are the
istituti, qui
delegates
avete
of your
un
institutes,
compito molto
you
importante,
have
appunto,
a
sia
task
di
which is very
formazione vostra,
important, not only as far as your
anche
personal
di
formation is
di
concerned,
rete,
but
cioè di
also as
scambi di
far as the
esperienze.
networking and
Guardate
exchange
che
of experience is concerned.
queste
Remember that
distinzioni, cioè
these
capire
distinctions
è abuso o è
understanding
comportamento
whether we are in
non
front of an
sgradevole
abuse
o
or
tossico,
an
eccetera.
unhealthy or toxic
Cioè,
behavior
sono,
is crucial.
stiamo
And
proprio insomma nel pieno proprio per cercare di capire se è
it is
possibile
also
tracciare
very
una linea di
difficult to
distinzione.
draw
E
a
qui è
specific
l'esperienza
line
anche
to
che ci
distinguish
aiuterà
between one and the other.
sicuramente, anche
Experience
lo
will help
scambio
us
tra di
to
noi,
understand, the
e
exchange
la
among us
formazione
will help us to
tantissimo,
understand.
e anche per
Formation will be
esempio
essential to this end,
come dire, il descrivere bene quello che può
together with
essere il
describing
ruolo di una
effectively
commissione, perché
the
quando
role of
man mano, per
a
esempio, la
commission like
commissione
ours,
istituita
because
comincia
when
a
when you create
ricevere
a
delle
commission that
segnalazioni o
starts
si
receiving
inizia una
reports
indagine
and
interna e
you
si
start an
comincia ad
internal
ascoltare la
investigation, you
presentatrice
start
e dopo si
listening
ascoltano i
to the
testimoni e
victims,
dopo si
then you
ascolta
listen
la
to the
persona
witnesses,
accusata,
and then you
poi
listen to the
incolpata
accused
perché
person.
è una procedura disciplinare, quindi
And this is a
amministrativa.
disciplinary
Poi metti
administrative
insieme tutti i
procedure,
pezzi e ti
then
rendi
you
conto
collect all the
che
pieces for the
effettivamente
puzzle
non
and you
c'è
realize
un
that
abuso vero e proprio
actually
e che
no
si sarebbe
real
potuto fare
abuse
qualcosa
occurred
prima.
and that
Allora è
you
chiaro
may
che
have
appunto
intervened
l'istituto
beforehand
è
and in
chiamato
another
anche a
way.
dotarsi
So
di
at this point, the institution is
altre
called
strategie,
upon
di
to
altre
have
soluzioni
different
di
strategies
formazione
and
e anche
solutions for
eventualmente
formation,
semplicemente di
and
dialogo, di
even
ascolto
as far
e
as dialogue and
contenimento, senza
listening and
ricorrere
that
necessariamente
containment
ad
is
una
concerned,
commissione che si
without
occupa solo
having
degli
a
abusi. Non so se
specific
mi spiego.
commission
Cioè
that
bisogna
just deals with
distinguere i due
abuses.
campi,
We need
perché
to make a
uno,
distinction
altrimenti
between the
una
two fields,
commissione si
because
ingolfa
otherwise
magari
our
di
commission will
segnalazioni.
just be
E,
focused on
e quindi,
every kind of
ripeto,
reports they will
dall'esperienza
receive.
si capirà come fare
Your
per
experience will
rispondere e
help you to
creare
understand how to
dei luoghi di
respond and to
ascolto
create
di questi
spaces for
disagi
listening for this
senza
kind of
necessariamente ricorrere alla
sufferings
commissione.
without specifically referring to the Commission for Safeguarding.
Poi ce n'è un'altra, a chi
Then there is
possiamo
also another one
rivolgerci per
to
iniziare
whom
questo
we may
percorso di creazione
refer
di
to
una
start this
commissione,
process of
stesura delle linee guida,
creation of commission
formazione
for
e sì,
safeguarding,
dipende
drafting
anche
of
un po'
guidelines, and so on and
sì,
so forth.
in che
Now, this
lingue
depends on the
appunto
languages
si deve parlare,
in
insomma,
which
che quindi a
you
livello
want to
linguistico, insomma,
work.
ci sono
At the
anche
level of UISG, there are
risorse
several
parlative che fanno appunto
resources,
la
and I'm
chiavistazione.
talking about female based resources because it is a sister that has this question. So there are many resources, but also exchanging information with other institutions. You may have guidelines. What I would like to recommend to you is not copying and paste the rules of and guidelines of main institutions, because otherwise I may receive, I don't know, guidelines with, you know, the superior general, the main superior general, and the clerics did this, did that. So you leave traces of male-based terminology, so it is not good. But having support and help from other institutions is also important. Brandon, Antonio, is there anything else you would like to add that appeared from the chat?
I'm just answering a direct question which to do with lay people and authority, and that's more complex about lay people who are connected to religious orders. To be very brief about it, I think the movement to involve lay people in religious orders has been one of the gifts of the Spirit of the last 50, 60 years. If we want lay people to be sharing in our charism, there are issues about power, the sharing of power and participation, and I endorse that. Otherwise, we can be accused of a certain tokenism in what we're doing. However, as with everything, there have to be clear lines of accountability and protections, because there have been cases where groups associated with religious order have been able to take a certain amount of power almost before the order loses any influence or any say. And I think that we have to be very careful how we build our agreements, etc. So yes, I'm in favour of power being shared. I think we have to be careful if people don't do that and think that we need to kind of try to be courageous and appreciate the generosity and goodwill, but we have to be sensible about how we build in the kind of contracts and structures and agreements of how we do these things.
Okay, muy bien.
Very well. So we still have 3 minutes. If there are no other questions for clarification, we would like to take the advantage of this last 3 minutes to thank our 3 speakers and presenters for today, Tiziana, Brendan, and Antonio. And we would like also to thank the interpreters for their collaboration, because without them, the whole communication would have been very hard. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to meeting you again in another webinar or even in presence, who knows. So thank you very much and see you soon.